The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor flickered, casting an eerie glow on Paige Randall's pale face as she stared at the white envelope in her trembling hands. The word "confidential" was stamped across it in bold red letters. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribcage. This was it, the moment that could change everything. "Mrs. Winters?" A nurse's voice broke through her thoughts. "The doctor will see you now." Paige nodded, clutching the envelope tighter as she followed the nurse into the sterile examination room. Dr. Evelyn Chen, a petite woman with kind eyes, greeted her with a gentle smile. "Paige, how are you feeling today?" Dr. Chen asked, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Anxious," Paige admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "These test results, they're going to tell me if I have it, aren't they?" Dr. Chen nodded solemnly. "Yes, they will. But remember, whatever the outcome, we're here to support you. Have you told your husband about the tests?" Paige's eyes darted to the floor. "No, I couldn't. Caden's been so busy with work lately. I didn't want to worry him unnecessarily." As Dr. Chen began to open the envelope, Paige's mind drifted to the moment that had led her here, 3 months earlier. The clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of conversation filled the grand ballroom of the Winters Tower. Paige stood by her husband's side, a vision in a shimmering emerald gown that hugged her curves. At 38, she still turned heads, her chestnut hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. Caden Winters, dashingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, commanded attention as he addressed the crowd of New York's elite. His steel-gray eyes sparkled with triumph as he raised his glass. "To Winters Construction's most successful year yet," he proclaimed. "And to my beautiful wife, Paige, without whom none of this would be possible." The crowd cheered, and Caden pulled Paige close, planting a kiss on her cheek. She beamed up at him, her heart swelling with pride and love. This was their moment, the culmination of 15 years of hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering support. As the party continued, Paige excused herself to use the restroom. On her way back, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Can you believe Caden Winters?" A woman's voice, dripping with disdain, carried from around the corner. "Acting like he's some self-made man when everyone knows it was his wife's family connections that got him started." "Oh, come on, Sarah," another voice chimed in. "You can't deny the man's got talent. Have you seen the way he charms investors?" "Talent?" Sarah scoffed. "More like a complete lack of conscience. I heard he screwed over his own brother-in-law to get that waterfront contract." Paige's heart raced. She knew the business world could be cutthroat, but surely Caden wouldn't. No, she refused to believe it. These were just jealous gossips spreading lies. She composed herself and rounded the corner, causing the two women to fall silent immediately. With a polite nod, Paige walked past them, her mind reeling. Back in the ballroom, she sought out Caden, finding him deep in conversation with a striking blonde woman she didn't recognize. As Paige approached, she caught the tail end of their exchange. "Don't worry, Tiffany, I'll make sure you're taken care of," Caden said, his voice low and intimate. The blonde, Tiffany, placed a manicured hand on Caden's arm, leaning in close. "I knew I could count on you, Kay." Paige cleared her throat, and Caden's head snapped up. For a split second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, fear, but it was gone so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. "Paige, darling." Caden's charm switched on like a light. "There you are. I want you to meet Tiffany Carter, our new head of PR. Tiffany, this is my wife, Paige." Tiffany's smile was dazzling, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Winters. Caden talks about you all the time." Paige forced a smile, shaking Tiffany's hand. "Welcome to the team, Tiffany. I'm sure you'll do great things for the company." As the night wore on, Paige couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The overheard conversation, Caden's secretive exchange with Tiffany, it all swirled in her mind, creating a knot of unease in her stomach. Later that night, as they rode home in their luxury SUV, Paige decided to broach the subject. "Caden," she began hesitantly, "I overheard something at the party about the waterfront contract." Caden's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What about it? Did you really outmaneuver my brother to get it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Caden sighed. "Paige, you know how this business works. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions. Your brother's company wasn't equipped to handle a project of that scale. I did what was best for Winters Construction." Paige felt her world tilt. "But he's family, Caden. How could you—" "Family." Caden's voice took on a hard edge. Was he thinking about family when he tried to undercut our bid? This is business, Paige. If you can't handle that, maybe you should stick to your charity work and leave the real decisions to me. The words hit Paige like a physical blow. In all their years together, Caden had never spoken to her like this. She turned to look out the window, blinking back tears as the glittering New York skyline blurred before her eyes. That night marked a shift in their relationship. Though Paige tried desperately to ignore it, she threw herself into her philanthropic work, focusing on the women's shelter she had founded years ago, but the nagging doubts persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. A month after the party, Paige noticed the first signs that something wasn't right with her health. Fatigue that seemed to seep into her bones, unexplained bruises, dizzy spells that came out of nowhere. At first, she brushed it off as stress, but as the symptoms worsened, she couldn't ignore them any longer, which brought her to this moment, sitting in Dr. Chen's office, waiting for news that could change everything. "Paige?" Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but serious, pulling her back to the present. "I'm afraid the tests confirm our suspicions. You have a rare form of leukemia." The world seemed to stop. Paige heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Leukemia? But she was young, healthy. They had plans, dreams. "It's aggressive," Dr. Chen continued, "but there are treatment options. We need to start chemotherapy as soon as possible. With your permission, I'd like to admit you today." Paige nodded numbly, her mind racing. I need to call Caden. He should be here." Dr. Chen squeezed her hand. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll have the nurse prepare your admission papers." As the doctor left the room, Paige pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She dialed Caden's number, her heart pounding as it rang once, twice, 3 times. "You've reached Caden Winters. I can't come to the phone right now. Please leave a message." Paige's voice cracked as she spoke. "Caden, it's me. I'm at the hospital. I need you. Please come as soon as you get this. It's important." She ended the call, tears streaming down her face. As she waited for a response that didn't come, Paige couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long, lonely battle. Hours passed in a blur of forms, blood draws, and hushed conversations with medical staff. Paige was settled into a private room, an IV already delivering the first round of chemotherapy drugs into her system. She stared at her phone, willing it to ring, to show any sign that Caden had received her message. Just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across her hospital room, the door burst open. Caden rushed in, his hair disheveled and his tie askew. "Paige, my God, what happened? Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes wide with concern as he took in the sight of his wife in the hospital bed. Paige felt a mixture of relief and anger wash over her. "Where were you, Caden? I've been trying to reach you all day." Caden ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered. "I was in meetings all day. Big client, you know how it is. I didn't see your message until an hour ago. Paige, what's going on?" She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the words she was about to say. "I have leukemia, Caden. It's pretty serious." The color drained from Caden's face. He sank into the chair beside her bed, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Finally, he managed to speak. How long have you known?" "I just found out today," Paige replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've been feeling off for weeks. I didn't want to worry you until I knew for sure." Caden's expression flickered between shock, fear, and something else. Was it guilt? He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll get through this, Paige. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. I'll make sure you have the best treatment available." Paige wanted to believe him, to feel comforted by his words, but something held her back. Maybe it was the lingering doubt from the overheard conversations, or the memory of his coldness in the car that night, or perhaps it was the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume that clung to his shirt collar. "Caden," she said, her voice stronger now, "I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me." He looked at her, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "Of course, darling. What is it?" Paige took a deep breath. "Is there something going on between you and Tiffany Carter?" The silence that followed was deafening. Caden's hand went slack in hers, and for a moment, Paige saw a myriad of emotions flash across his face. Surprise, guilt, anger, and finally, a carefully constructed mask of innocence. "Tiffany? Paige, she's an employee, a valuable one, yes, but nothing more. Where is this coming from?" Paige pressed on, her heart pounding. I saw the way you two were at the party. And now with you unreachable all day, Caden, please. If there's something I need to know, tell me now. I can't fight this disease and our demons at the same time. Caden stood up abruptly, pacing the small hospital room. I can't believe you're accusing me of this. Now of all times. Paige, you're sick, you're not thinking clearly. Let's focus on getting you better, okay? His deflection only fueled her suspicions. Caden, look me in the eye and tell me there's nothing going on. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, just as he opened his mouth to speak, his phone buzzed loudly. Caden glanced at it, and Paige saw a flash of panic cross his face. I have to take this, he muttered, already moving towards the door. It's an important client. I'll be right back, I promise. Before Paige could protest, he was gone, leaving her alone with her fears and the steady drip of the chemotherapy drugs. As the door closed behind him, she felt something inside her break. The unanswered question hung in the air, more painful than any diagnosis. In that moment, as the reality of her illness and the uncertainty of her marriage crashed over her, Paige made a silent vow. She would fight, not just against the cancer ravaging her body, but for the truth, for justice, and for her own dignity. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with strength and determination. Little did she know this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her in ways she never imagined. A journey that would reveal the true nature of love, betrayal, and the human spirit's capacity for both darkness and light. As the night deepened outside her hospital window, Paige closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The battle for her life and her future had begun. The weeks following Paige's diagnosis unfolded like a surreal nightmare. The stark white walls of New York Presbyterian Hospital became her new reality, a far cry from the glittering galas and luxurious penthouse she once called home. As summer faded into fall, Paige's body waged war against itself, the aggressive chemotherapy ravaging her system in an attempt to save her life. On a crisp October morning, Paige sat by the window of her private room, wrapped in a soft blanket, watching the world go by outside. The door opened and she turned, expecting to see a nurse. Instead, her best friend Olivia Martinez breezed in, arms laden with bags. "Okay, honey, I've got trashy magazines, your favorite organic smoothies, and a metric ton of hand sanitizer," Olivia announced, her infectious energy filling the room. "How are you holding up?" Paige managed a weak smile. "Better now that you're here. God, Liv, I don't know what I'd do without you." Olivia's expression softened as she took in Paige's gaunt appearance and the scarf covering her once lush hair. "Hey, what are best friends for? Someone's got to keep you up to date on all the gossip you're missing." As Olivia unpacked her offerings, Paige hesitated before asking the question that had been gnawing at her. Have you heard from Caden?" Olivia's hands stilled, her back to Paige. When she turned, her eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and pity. "Sweetie, I thought you knew he's in Dubai closing that big hotel deal." The words hit Paige like a physical blow. "Dubai? But he told me he was just going to Philadelphia for a few days. He promised he'd be back for my next round of chemo." Olivia moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking Paige's hand in hers. "I'm so sorry, Paige. I overheard some of the Winters construction guys talking at that charity event last night. They were joking about how Caden was living it up in the UAE while you were, well, you know." Paige's mind reeled. It wasn't just the lie about his whereabouts, it was the casual cruelty of it all. As she struggled to process this new betrayal, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Chen entered, her usual warm smile replaced by a look of concern. "Paige, how are you feeling today?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Paige admitted. "But I guess that means the chemo's working, right?" Dr. Chen's expression remained serious. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. Your latest test results show that the cancer isn't responding to the treatment as well as we'd hoped. We need to consider more aggressive options." The room seemed to spin around Paige. "More aggressive? What does that mean exactly?" "There's a new clinical trial," Dr. Chen explained. "It's showing promising results for cases like yours. But I won't lie to you, Paige. The side effects can be severe and there are risks involved." Olivia squeezed Paige's hand. "Whatever it takes, right? You've got this, girl." Paige nodded numbly. "How soon do we need to decide?" "The sooner the better," Dr. Chen replied. "But take a day or two to think it over, and Paige, it would be good to discuss this with your husband." This kind of treatment requires a strong support system. After Dr. Chen left, Paige turned to Olivia, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. What am I going to do, Liv? Caden's off God knows where lying to me, and now this. Olivia's face hardened with determination. First things first, we're going to call that lying SOB and give him a piece of our minds. Then we're going to fight this thing with everything we've got. As Olivia dialed Caden's number, putting it on speakerphone, Paige steeled herself for the confrontation. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. Caden, it's Paige, she began, her voice shaking. I know you're in Dubai, not Philadelphia. I need you to come home. Now, the doctors, they're talking about a new treatment and I can't do this alone. Just as she was about to hang up, the line clicked. Caden's voice, sounding distant and irritated, came through. Paige, what's this about Dubai? I told you, I'm in Philly. Don't lie to me, Caden, Paige snapped, a newfound strength in her voice. I know where you are. What I don't know is why you felt the need to lie about it. There was a long pause before Caden spoke again. Look, I'm sorry. This deal is huge for the company. I didn't want you to worry about me being so far away. Worry about you? Paige's laugh was bitter. I'm fighting for my life here, Caden. The doctors want to try an experimental treatment. I need my husband, not excuses. Another pause, longer this time. When Caden spoke again, his voice was strained. I'll be on the next flight home. Just hang in there, okay? As the call ended, Paige looked at Olivia, a mix of emotions swirling in her eyes. He's coming home. But why does it feel like I've lost him already? Olivia pulled her friend into a tight hug. Oh, honey, whatever happens, you've got me. We'll get through this together. Over the next few days, as Paige waited for Caden's return, she found herself reflecting on their relationship. She thought back to the early days, when they were just starting out, full of dreams and ambition. 15 years ago, Paige stood in the tiny kitchen of their first apartment, surrounded by moving boxes. Caden burst through the door, waving a piece of paper triumphantly. We got it, he exclaimed. The loan came through. We can start bidding on our first real project. Paige squealed with delight, throwing her arms around him. I knew you could do it. This is just the beginning, Kay. We're going to build an empire together. Caden's eyes shone with love and determination. I couldn't have done it without you, Paige. Your family's connections, your support. You're the foundation of everything we're building. As they celebrated that night, drinking cheap champagne from plastic cups, Paige had never felt more in love or more certain of their future together. Back in the present, Paige was jolted from her reverie by a commotion in the hallway. She looked up to see Caden striding into the room, looking impeccably dressed but slightly disheveled. Paige, he breathed, crossing the room in a few quick steps. I came as soon as I could. What's this about a new treatment? Before Paige could respond, Dr. Chen entered the room. Mr. Winters, I'm glad you're here. We have a lot to discuss. Over the next hour, Dr. Chen explained the proposed treatment plan in detail. The risks were significant, but so was the potential reward. As Paige listened, she couldn't help but notice Caden's restlessness, the way he kept checking his phone when he thought no one was looking. So, what do you think? Dr. Chen asked, looking between Paige and Caden. Paige took a deep breath. I want to do it. I have to try. Caden ran a hand through his hair, looking conflicted. Are you sure, Paige? It sounds incredibly risky. It's my best chance, Caden, Paige replied, a hint of steel in her voice. I need to know you're with me on this. Caden nodded, but Paige couldn't shake the feeling that his mind was elsewhere. As Dr. Chen left to make the necessary arrangements, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. So, Paige began, how was Dubai? Caden's head snapped up. It was fine. Look, Paige, I'm sorry I wasn't honest about where I was. Things have been crazy at work and I didn't want to add to your stress. Paige's laugh was hollow. Because finding out my husband is lying to me is so much less stressful, right? Before Caden could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression changing almost imperceptibly. I need to take this. It's about the Dubai deal. I'll be right back. As Caden stepped out into the hallway, Paige felt a familiar sense of unease wash over her. She strained to hear his conversation, catching only fragments. Can't talk now, Tiff. I know, but it's complicated. Just give me some time. Paige's heart sank. Her suspicions about Tiffany Carter, which had been simmering for months, suddenly felt all too real. As Caden re-entered the room, she made a split-second decision. "Caden," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I need you to be honest with me. What's going on with you and Tiffany?" Caden's face paled. "Tiffany? She's just an employee, Paige. We've been over this." "An employee you call Tiff and have secret conversations with?" Paige pressed. "Please, Caden, if there's something I need to know, tell me now, before I start this treatment, before we go any further." The silence that stretched between them was deafening. Caden opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Just as he seemed about to say something, a nurse entered the room. "Mrs. Winters, we're ready to begin the treatment prep. Mr. Winters, I'm afraid you'll need to step out for a bit." As Caden moved towards the door, Paige called out to him, "Caden, we're not done with this conversation." He nodded, looking torn. "I know. We'll talk later, I promise." As the door closed behind him, Paige couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. She closed her eyes, steeling herself for the battle ahead, not just against the cancer, but for the truth about her marriage. Over the next few weeks, Paige's world narrowed to the confines of her hospital room and the brutal regimen of the clinical trial. The side effects were every bit as severe as Dr. Chen had warned, leaving Paige weak, nauseous, and in constant pain. Through it all, she clung to the hope that the treatment was working, that she was buying herself more time. Caden's presence during this time was sporadic at best. He would show up for brief visits, always looking harried and distracted. More often than not, he was on his phone, stepping out for important calls that seemed to multiply by the day. It was during one of these absences that Olivia broached the subject Paige had been avoiding. "Honey," Olivia began, her voice gentle but firm, "I think it's time we talk about Caden." Paige sighed, adjusting herself in the hospital bed. "What's there to talk about, Liv? He's busy with work. The company needs him." Olivia's eyes flashed with anger. "Bullshit. You need him. And where is he? I'll tell you where. He's with her." Paige's heart clenched. "You don't know that for sure." "Maybe not," Olivia conceded. "But I have eyes, Paige. And more importantly, I have sources. Tiffany's been bragging to anyone who'll listen about how close she and Caden have become, how he confides in her, depends on her." Tears welled up in Paige's eyes. I can't think about this right now, Liv. I need to focus on getting better." Olivia took Paige's hand, her expression softening. "I know, sweetie, and that's exactly why you need to know the truth. You can't heal if you're constantly worried about what Caden's up to." Before Paige could respond, there was a knock at the door. To her surprise, it wasn't a nurse or doctor, but her brother, Michael. "Hey, sis," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Thought it was about time I paid you a visit." Paige's eyes widened. She hadn't seen Michael since before her diagnosis, not since the fallout over the waterfront contract. "Michael, what are you doing here?" He approached the bed, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Olivia called me. Told me what's been going on. Paige, I'm so sorry. I should have been here sooner." As Michael took a seat beside her, Paige felt a surge of conflicting emotions. I thought you hated me. After what happened with the contract." Michael shook his head. "I was angry, yeah, but not at you, never at you. It was all Caden. And now, hearing about how he's been treating you. Paige, I need you to know something." Paige tensed, sensing that whatever Michael was about to say would change everything. "What is it?" Michael took a deep breath. "The waterfront contract? Caden didn't just outmaneuver me. He sabotaged my company, planted false information, spread rumors about our financial stability. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. We lost everything, Paige." The room seemed to spin around her. "No," Paige whispered. He couldn't. "He did," Michael said firmly. "And that's not all. Paige, there's something you need to see." He pulled out his phone, hesitating for a moment before handing it to her. On the screen was a series of photos, Caden and Tiffany, caught in intimate moments at various locations, restaurants, hotel lobbies, even boarding a private jet together. Paige felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The evidence was right there in front of her, undeniable and damning. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to ignore was suddenly painfully real. As the full weight of the betrayal crashed over her, Paige felt something inside her shift. The pain and shock were still there, but alongside them, a new emotion began to take root. A cold, hard determination. "I want you to tell me everything," she said. her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Every detail, every dirty secret, and then we're going to make him pay." Michael and Olivia exchanged a look, surprised by the steel in Paige's voice. As Michael began to speak, laying out the full extent of Caden's deceptions and manipulations, Paige listened with growing resolve. In that moment, as the truth of her marriage and the depth of Caden's betrayal became clear, Paige made a decision. She would fight, not just against the cancer that was ravaging her body, but against the man who had betrayed her trust and shattered her world. As the afternoon wore on and Michael continued to reveal the extent of Caden's misdeeds, a plan began to form in Paige's mind. It was risky, potentially dangerous, and would require every ounce of strength she had left. But as she looked at the concern on her brother's face and felt the unwavering support of her best friend, Paige knew she had to try. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hospital room, when Paige finally spoke. "I need your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Both of you, what I'm about to ask, it's not going to be easy, and it might not be entirely legal." Olivia and Michael leaned in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. As Paige began to outline her plan, a spark of the old fire returned to her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for survival, but for justice. Little did Caden know, as he wined and dined Tiffany in a luxurious Dubai hotel, that the wheels of his downfall were already in motion. The woman he had underestimated, the wife he had betrayed, was about to become his worst nightmare. As night fell over New York City, Paige Randall Winters made a vow. She would not only survive this ordeal, she would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The stage was set for a battle that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and revenge. And Paige was ready to fight with everything she had left. The crisp autumn air carried a chill that seemed to seep into Paige's bones as she sat in the back of the taxi, her eyes fixed on the passing New York skyline. After weeks of grueling treatment, she had finally been discharged from the hospital. But instead of the joyful homecoming she had once imagined, Paige felt a sense of dread growing with each passing mile. As the taxi pulled up to the luxurious high-rise she shared with Caden, Paige took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but nothing could truly prepare her for the reality of confronting her husband. The doorman's eyes widened in surprise as he saw her. "Mrs. Winters, welcome back. We've missed you around here." Paige managed a weak smile. "Thank you, George. It's good to be back." As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, Paige's mind raced. The plan she had concocted with Michael and Olivia was already in motion, but this confrontation with Caden was the linchpin. Everything hinged on how he would react. The elevator doors opened and Paige stepped into the foyer of their home. The silence was deafening. "Caden?" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. No response. She made her way through the apartment, noting with a pang how little had changed in her absence. It was as if time had stood still, preserving a life that no longer existed. As she approached Caden's home office, she heard muffled voices. Her heart pounding, Paige pushed open the door. The scene that greeted her was like a knife to the heart. Caden sat behind his desk, Tiffany perched on its edge, leaning in close. They both froze at her entrance, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt. "Paige," Caden exclaimed, jumping to his feet. We didn't expect you home today." Tiffany slid off the desk, smoothing her skirt. "Mrs. Winters, I was just leaving. Welcome home." As Tiffany brushed past her, Paige felt a surge of anger that threatened to overwhelm her, but she held it in check, remembering the larger goal. "Caden," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk." He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Of course. Paige, what you just saw, it's not what you think." Paige laughed, a hollow sound that seemed to surprise even her. "Really? Because I think I just walked in on my husband and his mistress in our home. Please, enlighten me on what I'm misunderstanding." Caden's face hardened. "You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. The stress of your treatment." "Don't," Paige cut him off. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me, Caden. I know everything. The affair, the business deals, what you did to Michael, all of it." The color drained from Caden's face. For a moment he looked like he might try to deny it. Then his shoulders sagged. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," Paige replied. She moved to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, suddenly feeling exhausted. What I want to know is why. 15 years, Caden. Was any of it real? Caden sank back into his chair, looking defeated. Of course it was real, Paige. In the beginning, God, I loved you so much. But things changed. The business grew and suddenly there was so much at stake. I had to make hard decisions. Hard decisions? Paige's voice rose. Like destroying my brother's company? Like cheating on your sick wife? I never meant for any of this to happen, Caden said, his voice pleading. The thing with Michael, it was just business, and Tiffany, it started as nothing, just a distraction. But then you got sick, and I couldn't handle it. I'm not proud of what I've done, Paige. Paige felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her illness. So that's it? You couldn't handle my cancer, so you decided to betray everything we built together? Caden stood up, moving around the desk towards her. No, it's not like that. Paige, I still care about you. We can fix this. Let me make it up to you. As he reached out to touch her, Paige recoiled. Don't. Just don't. I came here today to tell you that I'm leaving you, Caden. It's over. The words hung in the air between them. Caden's expression shifted from shock to anger. Leaving me? Paige, be reasonable. Where will you go? How will you support yourself? You're sick, for God's sake. Paige stood, drawing herself up to her full height. That's not your concern anymore. I'll be staying with Olivia for now. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. As she turned to leave, Caden's voice stopped her. You can't do this, Paige. Everything we have, the money, the properties, it's all tied up in the business. You'll get nothing if you leave. Paige looked back at him, a small smile playing on her lips. We'll see about that. With those parting words, she walked out of the office and out of her married life, leaving a stunned Caden in her wake. As the elevator descended, Paige felt a mix of emotions washing over her: grief, anger, fear, but also, surprisingly, relief. The confrontation she had dreaded for so long was over. Now the real work could begin. Olivia was waiting in the lobby, pacing nervously. When she saw Paige, she rushed over. How did it go? Are you okay? Paige nodded, feeling drained but determined. It's done, let's get out of here. As they drove to Olivia's apartment, Paige filled her in on the confrontation with Caden. Olivia listened, her expression a mix of anger and concern. That bastard, she muttered. I can't believe he tried to blame you for his affair, as if your cancer was an inconvenience to him. Paige sighed. I almost feel sorry for him, Liv. He really believes he can talk his way out of this, like he always has. Olivia shot her a sharp look. You're not having second thoughts, are you? No, Paige said firmly. No, I'm more convinced than ever that this is the right thing to do. Caden needs to face the consequences of his actions, and I need to reclaim my life. As they settled into Olivia's guest room, which would be Paige's home for the foreseeable future, the reality of her new situation began to sink in. She was starting over, in every sense of the word. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Over the next few days, Paige threw herself into the details of her plan. Michael had put her in touch with a brilliant but unconventional lawyer named Samantha Reeves, who specialized in high-stakes divorces and corporate litigation. Mrs. Winters, Samantha said during their first meeting, her sharp eyes taking in Paige's frail appearance. What you're proposing is risky. If we're caught, the consequences could be severe. Paige nodded. I understand, but Caden has left me no choice. He's hidden assets, manipulated contracts. He thinks he's untouchable. I need to prove him wrong. Samantha leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. Well then, let's make him regret ever underestimating you. As they delved into the intricacies of Winters Construction's finances, a pattern began to emerge. Caden had been clever, but not infallible. There were discrepancies, hidden accounts, questionable transactions that, when pieced together, painted a damning picture. We need hard evidence, Samantha explained. Emails, contracts, anything that proves Caden knowingly engaged in fraudulent activities. Without that, it's just our word against his. Paige bit her lip, thinking, I might know someone who can help us with that. That evening, she made a call she never thought she'd make. Hello, Tiffany. It's Paige Winters. I think we need to talk. Meeting Tiffany in person was surreal. The woman who had played a part in destroying her marriage sat across from her in a quiet cafe, looking nervous and defiant in equal measure. Why did you want to meet? Tiffany asked, her voice wary. Paige took a deep breath. Because I think you and I might be able to help each other. Tiffany, how much do you really know about Caden's business practices? Tiffany's eyes widened. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do, Paige pressed. You've been by his side for months. You must have seen things, heard things that didn't quite add up. Tiffany was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. Finally, she looked up, her expression resolute. What do you want to know? Over the next hour, Tiffany painted a picture of a man consumed by ambition and greed. She spoke of backdoor deals, of threats made to competitors, of money funneled into offshore accounts, and, most damning of all, she had proof. I never meant for things to go this far, Tiffany said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought he loved me, but I was just a pawn in his game, wasn't I? Paige felt a surge of pity for the younger woman. We both were, Tiffany, but now we have a chance to set things right. As Tiffany handed over a flash drive containing emails and documents that would prove crucial to their case, Paige felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They had what they needed. Now, it was time to strike. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Paige, despite her ongoing health struggles, threw herself into building their case. She worked closely with Samantha, poring over financial records and legal documents, determined to understand every aspect of Caden's empire. Michael proved to be an invaluable ally, using his industry connections to gather additional evidence of Caden's misdeeds. Olivia, ever the loyal friend, became Paige's rock, offering emotional support and practical help in equal measure. As their case against Caden took shape, Paige found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. There were moments when the memories of their happy years together would surface, leaving her questioning her course of action. Was she going too far? Was revenge worth the cost to her soul? One particularly difficult night, as she lay awake battling both the physical pain of her illness and the emotional turmoil of her situation, Paige found herself drawn to the box of mementos she had brought from the penthouse. Inside, among photos and letters, she found the journal she had kept in the early years of their marriage. With trembling hands, she opened it, her eyes falling on an entry from just after their first anniversary. Caden surprised me today with a weekend getaway to the Berkshires. As we sat by the fire talking about our dreams for the future, I was struck by how lucky I am. We may not have much yet, but we have each other. And that's enough. More than enough. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us. Tears streamed down Paige's face as she read the words of her younger, more naive self. The future she had dreamed of then was gone, shattered by betrayal and lies. But in its place, a new future was taking shape. One forged in pain, yes, but also in strength and determination. Wiping her eyes, Paige made a decision. She would see this through, not out of a desire for revenge, but out of a need for justice. For herself, for Michael, and for all those Caden had wronged in his ruthless pursuit of success. The following morning, energized by her newfound resolve, Paige called a meeting with Samantha, Michael, and Olivia. I want to take things a step further, she announced, her voice steady. It's not enough to just divorce Caden and take my share. We need to expose everything he's done. To the board, to the shareholders, to the public? Samantha leaned forward, her expression serious. Paige, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. Caden will fight us with everything he has. Paige nodded. I'm sure. He needs to face the consequences of his actions, and I need to do this for myself, to prove that I'm not just a victim in this story. As they began to outline their strategy, for what would undoubtedly be a very public and very ugly battle, Paige felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in months. She was no longer just fighting against cancer or against Caden's betrayal. She was fighting for her future on her own terms. Days turned into weeks, and their case against Caden grew stronger. Paige, despite the toll of her ongoing treatment, found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. She threw herself into learning every aspect of Winter's construction, determined to understand the empire she had unknowingly helped build. It was during one of her late-night research sessions that Paige stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. Buried deep in the company's financial records was evidence of a massive cover-up. Winter's construction had been cutting corners on safety regulations, resulting in multiple injuries and even deaths on their job sites. Caden had systematically silenced victims and their families through threats and payoffs. Horrified by the discovery, Paige immediately called Samantha. "We need to add this to our case," she insisted. "This goes beyond financial fraud. He's put people's lives at risk." Samantha's voice was grim. "This changes everything, Paige. If we can prove this, Caden won't just face financial ruin. He could be looking at serious jail time." As they worked to corroborate the evidence, Paige found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. Exposing Caden's safety violations would likely bring down the entire company, potentially putting thousands of innocent employees out of work. Was her quest for justice worth the collateral damage? Torn, Paige sought advice from an unexpected source. She reached out to Dr. Chen, the oncologist who had been with her since her initial diagnosis. "Doctor Chen," Paige began, her voice hesitant, "I know this isn't your area of expertise, but I need some guidance. If you knew someone was doing something terrible, something that had hurt people and would likely hurt more in the future, but exposing them would also hurt innocent people, what would you do?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Chen spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "In medicine, we often face difficult ethical decisions. Sometimes we have to cause short-term pain to achieve long-term healing. The key is to minimize harm while doing what's ultimately right." Paige pondered these words, finding in them the clarity she needed. She would move forward with exposing Caden's crimes, but she would also do everything in her power to protect the innocent employees who would be affected. With renewed determination, Paige and her team prepared for the final phase of their plan. They would present their evidence to the Winters Construction Board of Directors, giving them an opportunity to address the issues internally before going public. The night before the board meeting, Paige sat alone in Olivia's guest room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was a far cry from the polished socialite she had been just months ago. Her hair, once long and lustrous, was now a short, silvery crop. Her face was gaunt, bearing the marks of her battle with cancer. But her eyes burned with a fierce determination that had never been there before. As she prepared for bed, Paige's phone buzzed with an incoming text. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw it was from Caden. "Paige, I know what you're planning. Please don't do this. We can work things out. For old time's sake, meet me at our spot in Central Park tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Let's talk." Paige's finger hovered over the delete button. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, to cut all ties with the man who had betrayed her so thoroughly. But another part, a part she thought had died, stirred with curiosity. What could Caden possibly have to say? After a moment's hesitation, she typed out a reply, "I'll be there." The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Paige arrived at their spot, a secluded bench overlooking the lake, precisely at 7 a.m. Caden was already there, pacing nervously. When he saw her, his face lit up with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Paige, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." Paige regarded him coolly, maintaining her distance. "I'm here, Caden. What do you want?" Caden took a step towards her, his hands outstretched. "Paige, I know I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but please don't go through with this. You'll destroy everything we've built." "We?" Paige's laugh was bitter. "There is no we anymore, Caden. You made sure of that." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. "I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed your trust. But think about the consequences of what you're about to do. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Our reputation will be ruined. Is that really what you want?" Paige felt a surge of anger. What I wanted was a husband who stood by me when I got sick. What I wanted was a man who valued our marriage more than his ambition. What I wanted was the truth, Caden. And now, that's exactly what everyone else is going to get. Caden's expression hardened. "You don't want to do this, Paige. You have no idea what you're up against. I've got resources you can't even imagine. If you go through with this, You'll what?" Paige interrupted, her voice sharp. "Threaten me? Bribe me? Try to discredit me? Go ahead, Caden. I'm not afraid of you anymore." As she turned to leave, Caden grabbed her arm. "Paige, wait, please. I still love you. We can start over. Forget all of this. I'll make it up to you, I swear." For a moment, Paige felt her resolve waver. The sincerity in Caden's eyes, the familiar touch of his hand, it all brought back a flood of memories. But then she remembered the lies, the betrayal, the lives ruined by his greed. She gently removed his hand from her arm. "No, Caden. It's too late for that. I loved you once with all my heart. But that love died the day I realized you cared more about your empire than about me or anyone else." With those words, Paige walked away, leaving Caden standing alone by the lake. As she made her way out of the park, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The last lingering doubt, the last thread of attachment to her old life, had been severed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Board meeting in an hour. Are you ready?" Paige took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Yes," she replied, "it's time." An hour later, Paige stood outside the imposing doors of the Winters Construction boardroom. Samantha was by her side, a reassuring presence in the face of what was to come. "Remember," Samantha said softly, "no matter what happens in there, you've already won. You're standing up for what's right." Paige nodded, her hand on the door handle. "Let's do this." As they entered the room, the buzz of conversation died down. A dozen pairs of eyes turned to stare at Paige, some curious, some hostile. At the head of the table sat Caden, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Mrs. Winters," one of the board members spoke up, "I believe you have some concerns you'd like to address?" Paige took her place at the opposite end of the table from Caden. She could feel his eyes boring into her, but she refused to meet his gaze. "Concerns is putting it mildly, gentlemen," Paige began, her voice steady. "What I'm about to show you goes beyond mere concerns. It's evidence of systematic fraud, safety violations, and criminal negligence that goes right to the top of this company." For the next hour, Paige and Samantha laid out their case. They presented financial records showing the misappropriation of funds, emails detailing the cover-up of workplace accidents, and testimony from employees who had been silenced. As the presentation went on, the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. Board members exchanged worried glances. Some looked shocked, others angry. Caden sat stone-faced, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. Finally, as Samantha concluded their presentation, silence fell over the room. Paige looked around at the stunned faces of the board members, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness. "Mrs. Winters," the chairman of the board spoke up, his voice grave, "these are extremely serious allegations. If even half of what you've presented is true, the implications for this company are catastrophic." Caden finally broke his silence, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "This is absurd. It's a fabrication, a vindictive attack by a bitter ex-wife. None of this would hold up in court." "Actually," Samantha interjected smoothly, "we have corroborating evidence for every claim we've made. Witness statements, bank records, internal memos. We're fully prepared to take this to court if necessary." The chairman held up a hand, silencing further debate. "We need time to digest this information and conduct our own investigation. Mrs. Winters, I assume you're prepared to cooperate fully with our inquiry." Paige nodded. "Of course. My only goal here is to see justice done and to protect the employees and clients who have been put at risk by these practices." As the meeting adjourned, Paige felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had done it. She had faced her fears, confronted Caden, and exposed the truth. Whatever happened next, she knew she had made the right choice. As she and Samantha left the boardroom, Paige's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart nearly stopped as she read the headline, "Breaking Winters Construction CEO Caden Winters found dead in Central Park." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Paige struggled to process the words on the screen. Caden, dead? How was this possible? She had just seen him hours ago. As more details emerged, the full shocking truth came to light. Caden had apparently taken his own life, unable to face the consequences of his actions. He had been found in the very spot where he and Paige had met that morning, a note clutched in his hand. The revelation sent shockwaves through Paige's world. In exposing Caden's crimes, she had set in motion a chain of events that had led to his death. The moral implications were staggering. Was she responsible? Had her quest for justice gone too far? As the media frenzy erupted and the legal implications of Caden's death began to unfold, Paige found herself at the center of a storm she never could have anticipated. The simple act of standing up for what was right had turned into something far more complex and morally ambiguous. In the days that followed, as she grappled with the consequences of her actions and the unexpected turn of events, Paige realized that her journey was far from over. The battle she had thought was ending was, in many ways, just beginning. The death of Caden Winters would change everything, not just for Paige, but for everyone involved in Winters Construction. As she stood on the precipice of this new reality, Paige knew that the choices she made next would define not just her future, but her very soul. The story of Paige Randall Winters was about to enter its most challenging and transformative chapter yet. The days following Caden's death passed in a blur of police interviews, media speculation, and intense public scrutiny. Paige found herself at the center of a storm she never could have anticipated, her every move dissected by a voracious press and an outraged public. As she sat in Olivia's living room, staring blankly at the muted TV where her face was plastered across every news channel, Paige felt a crushing weight of guilt and uncertainty. "I never wanted this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I wanted justice, not death." Olivia squeezed her hand. "This isn't your fault, Paige. Caden made his own choices," but the words rang hollow. Deep down, Paige knew that her actions had set these events in motion. The consequences of her choices were far more severe than she could have ever imagined. As the investigation into Caden's death unfolded, new details emerged that painted an even more complex picture. The suicide note found with Caden's body revealed a man torn apart by guilt and fear. He wrote of the crushing weight of his lies, of the lives he had ruined in his pursuit of success. But he also spoke of Paige, of the love he had squandered and the pain he had caused her. The note's final lines haunted Paige. "I hope that in exposing my sins, Paige finds the peace she deserves. I only wish I had been strong enough to face the consequences of my actions. Perhaps in death, I can give her the justice she seeks." These words threw Paige into a tailspin of conflicting emotions. On one hand, they seemed to absolve her of direct responsibility for Caden's death. On the other, they forced her to confront the depth of pain and desperation that had driven him to this final, irreversible act. As the media frenzy reached fever pitch, Paige retreated from public view, sequestering herself in Olivia's apartment. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and board members, all demanding answers she didn't have. It was during this time of isolation that Paige received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Chen arrived one afternoon, concern etched on her face. "Paige," she said gently, "I've been trying to reach you. You've missed your last 2 treatment sessions." Paige looked away, ashamed. In the chaos of recent events, she had completely forgotten about her own health. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen. I've been overwhelmed." Dr. Chen sat beside her, her voice firm but kind. "I understand you're going through an incredibly difficult time, but Paige, your cancer doesn't care about scandals or public opinion. If we don't continue your treatment, all the progress we've made could be undone." These words hit Paige like a physical blow. She had been so consumed by the fallout from exposing Caden's crimes that she had neglected her own fight for survival. The realization brought her to tears. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm drowning. Maybe it would be better if I just let go." Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "Paige Randall Winters, don't you dare give up now. You've fought too hard, come too far. Yes, you're facing challenges you never expected, but you're still here. You're still fighting, and I'll be damned if I let you throw in the towel." The doctor's unexpected vehemence shocked Paige out of her spiral of self-pity. She looked at Dr. Chen, really looked at her, and saw not just a medical professional, but a woman who genuinely cared about her well-being. "You're right," Paige said, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry, I'll come in for treatment tomorrow." Dr. Chen nodded, satisfied. "Good. And Paige, remember, healing isn't just about your body. Your mind and spirit need care too. Have you considered talking to someone about everything that's happened?" The suggestion of therapy had never occurred to Paige. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to handle whatever life threw at her. But now, facing the biggest challenge of her life, she realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. I think that might be a good idea," she admitted. The next day, as Paige sat in the hospital receiving her treatment, she made a decision. She would no longer let circumstances control her. It was time to take charge of her narrative, to face the consequences of her actions head-on, and to find a way forward. With renewed determination, Paige reached out to Samantha. "I want to make a public statement," she declared. "It's time I told my side of the story." Samantha was cautious. "Are you sure about this, Paige? Once you go public, there's no going back. The media will dissect every word." "I'm sure," Paige replied, her voice steady. "I can't hide forever, and I owe it to myself to Caden's memory, and to all the people affected by this to be honest about what happened. The press conference was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Paige worked tirelessly with Samantha and a team of PR experts to craft her statement. She was determined to be truthful without being sensational, to take responsibility for her actions without martyring herself. On the day of the press conference, Paige stood before a sea of cameras and microphones, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Good morning. My name is Paige Randall Winters, and I'm here today to address the events surrounding Winters Construction and the death of my husband, Caden Winters. First and foremost, I want to express my deepest condolences to everyone affected by this tragedy. The loss of life is never something to be taken lightly, and my heart goes out to all those who are grieving. I also want to take responsibility for my role in these events. When I discovered the extent of the fraudulent activities and safety violations at Winters Construction, I felt I had a moral obligation to bring them to light. My intention was never to cause harm, but to prevent further wrongdoing and protect innocent lives. However, I now realize that my actions, while well-intentioned, had consequences far beyond what I anticipated. I never wanted or expected Caden to take his own life. His death is a tragedy that I will carry with me always. To the employees of Winters Construction, I want to say this. I am sorry for the uncertainty and fear you must be feeling. I want you to know that I am committed to working with the board to ensure that the company is restructured in a way that preserves as many jobs as possible while addressing the issues that have come to light. To the families affected by the safety violations, I offer my sincerest apologies. No words can undo the harm that has been done, but I pledge to do everything in my power to make things right. Finally, I want to address the speculation about my own health. Yes, I am battling cancer. This fight has taught me the value of every single day, and it has given me the strength to stand up for what I believe is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. I don't stand before you today seeking forgiveness or absolution. I simply want to offer the truth as I know it. I am prepared to face whatever consequences come from my actions, and I hope that in time, some good can come from this painful situation. Thank you." As Paige stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in a cacophony of shouted questions and camera flashes. But she tuned it all out, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other as she exited the room. In the days that followed, Paige's statement became the subject of intense debate. Some praised her courage and honesty, while others accused her of trying to salvage her reputation at Caden's expense. But for Paige, the relief of finally speaking her truth outweighed any public opinion. With the press conference behind her, Paige turned her attention to the daunting task of restructuring her life. She met with financial advisors and lawyers, working to disentangle her assets from Winters Construction and establish her own financial independence. It was during one of these meetings that Paige had an epiphany. As she looked at the staggering figures representing her personal wealth, she realized she had an opportunity to do real good. "I want to set up a foundation," she announced to her startled advisors. "We'll call it the Phoenix Foundation. Its mission will be twofold: to support cancer research and to provide assistance to individuals and families affected by corporate fraud and unsafe working conditions." As her team scrambled to make this vision a reality, Paige felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in months. She threw herself into the work, researching potential partners, drafting mission statements, and outlining programs. But even as she worked towards this new goal, Paige's health remained a constant concern. The stress of recent events had taken its toll, and her doctors warned that her cancer was showing signs of progression. One particularly difficult day after receiving discouraging test results, Paige found herself sitting in a small chapel in the hospital. She wasn't particularly religious, but something about the quiet, sacred space called to her. As she sat there, lost in thought, an elderly woman took a seat beside her. "Heavy burdens you're carrying, child," the woman said softly. Paige looked at her, surprised. "Is it that obvious?" The woman smiled kindly. "To these old eyes, yes. Want to talk about it?" Maybe it was the woman's gentle demeanor, or maybe it was just the need to unburden herself to a stranger, but Paige found herself pouring out her story. She spoke of her illness, of Caden's betrayal, of the scandal and its aftermath, and finally she voiced the fear that had been gnawing at her. "What if it was all for nothing?" she whispered. What if I've ruined lives, caused a man's death, and in the end I don't even survive to see any good come of it? The old woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she took Paige's hand in her gnarled one. Child, let me tell you something. The measure of a life isn't in its length, but in its impact. You've faced unimaginable challenges with courage. You've stood up for what's right, even when it cost you dearly. And now you're working to create something that will help others long after you're gone. That's not nothing, that's everything. Tears streamed down Paige's face as the woman's words sank in. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of peace. As she left the chapel that day, Paige made a decision. She would fight her cancer with everything she had, but she would also prepare for the possibility that she might not win that fight. She needed to ensure that her vision for the Phoenix Foundation would outlive her. Over the next few weeks, Paige worked tirelessly on two fronts. She adhered rigorously to her treatment regimen, following every recommendation from Dr. Chen and exploring alternative therapies. At the same time, she poured her energy into solidifying the structure and mission of the Phoenix Foundation. She reached out to Michael, asking him to serve on the foundation's board. "I need someone I can trust absolutely," she told him. "Someone who understands where this all started and why it matters so much." Michael agreed without hesitation. "I'm honored, Paige, and I promise you, I'll make sure your vision is carried out, no matter what happens." As the foundation took shape, Paige also began the process of rewriting her will. She was determined that the bulk of her fortune would go to the Phoenix Foundation, ensuring its ability to carry out its mission for years to come. It was during this time that Paige received an unexpected call from Tiffany Carter. The younger woman sounded nervous and contrite. "Mrs. Winters." "Paige," Tiffany began hesitantly, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to tell you, I'm sorry for everything, and I want to help if I can. I have information, documents that could help bring justice to the people Caden hurt. If you want them, they're yours." Paige was silent for a long moment, processing this offer. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate your offer, and I think that information could be very valuable to the Foundation's work. But I have to ask, why now?" Tiffany's voice cracked as she replied. "Because I've realized the part I played in all of this, and I want to make it right somehow. I can never undo the hurt I caused you, but maybe I can help prevent others from being hurt in the future." This conversation left Paige with a lot to think about. The offer of additional evidence could be crucial in the Foundation's efforts to hold other corporations accountable, but it also meant reopening wounds that were barely beginning to heal. After much deliberation, Paige decided to accept Tiffany's offer. She arranged for the documents to be handed over to the Foundation's legal team, choosing not to meet with Tiffany in person. It was a step towards forgiveness, but not quite a full embrace of it. As autumn turned to winter, Paige felt a sense of things coming full circle. The Phoenix Foundation was officially launched with a small private ceremony. Standing before a group of board members, lawyers, and close friends, Paige felt a surge of pride and hope. "This foundation," she declared, her voice strong despite her frail appearance, "is not about me. It's not about Caden or Winter's Construction or any individual. It's about creating lasting change. It's about turning pain into purpose, tragedy into transformation. Together we have the power to make a real difference in people's lives, and that's exactly what we're going to do." The room erupted in applause, and for a moment, Paige allowed herself to bask in the sense of accomplishment. She had taken the shattered pieces of her life and created something meaningful, something that would outlast her. As the event wound down, Paige found herself alone on the balcony, looking out over the New York skyline. Snow was beginning to fall, blanketing the city in a soft white silence. She closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "You did it, Paige," Olivia's voice came from behind her. "Against all odds, you really did it." Paige turned to her friend, a small smile on her lips. "We did it, Liv. I couldn't have gotten here without you, without all of you." As they stood there watching the snow fall, Paige felt a sense of closure. The hardest part of her journey was behind her. Now she could focus on her health, on nurturing the foundation, on living whatever time she had left with purpose and dignity. But life, as Paige had learned, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. The next morning, as Paige was preparing for a routine checkup with Dr. Chen, her phone rang. It was Samantha, her voice tight with urgency. "Paige, turn on the news. Now." With a sense of dread, Paige switched on the TV. The headline that scrolled across the bottom of the screen made her blood run cold. Breaking. New evidence suggests Caden Winter's death may not have been suicide. As the reporter began to detail allegations of foul play and hints of a cover-up, Paige felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Just when she thought she had found resolution, the past had come back to haunt her in the most unexpected way. The peace she had so recently found suddenly felt very fragile indeed. As the implications of this new development began to sink in, Paige realized that her journey was far from over. In fact, it seemed that the most challenging chapter was just beginning. The news of potential foul play in Caden's death hit Paige like a tidal wave, threatening to sweep away everything she had worked so hard to build. As she sat in Dr. Chen's office, barely hearing the doctor's concerned questions about her elevated heart rate and blood pressure, Paige's mind raced with the implications of this new development. "Mrs. Winters? Paige?" Dr. Chen's voice finally broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" Paige blinked, focusing on the doctor's worried face. I'm not sure. Did you see the news?" Dr. Chen nodded gravely. "I did. Paige, I know this must be incredibly stressful for you, but right now we need to focus on your health. Your latest test results are concerning." But Paige was already reaching for her phone, dialing Samantha's number. "I'm sorry, Dr. Chen. I need to deal with this. Can we reschedule?" As she rushed out of the hospital, Samantha's voice came through the phone, tense and businesslike. "Paige, I've already got our PR team working on a statement. We need to get ahead of this before the speculation gets out of control." "Speculation?" Paige repeated, her voice rising. "Samantha, they're suggesting Caden was murdered. This isn't just speculation, it's insanity." I know, Samantha soothed, "but we need to stay calm. Meet me at my office in an hour. We'll figure this out." The next few days passed in a blur of emergency meetings, press statements, and increasingly sensational news reports. Paige watched in horror as her carefully constructed narrative began to unravel under the weight of wild theories and accusations. The media, which had just begun to move on from the Winters construction scandal, now pounced on this new angle with renewed vigor. Tabloids ran lurid headlines speculating about Paige's involvement in Caden's death. More reputable outlets questioned the thoroughness of the original investigation. As Paige sat in yet another strategy meeting with Samantha and her team, she felt a deep weariness settling into her bones. "How did we get here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it was over." Samantha's expression was grim. "It's never really over, Paige. Not in cases like this. But we're going to fight this. We've got truth on our side." But as the days wore on, the truth seemed increasingly elusive. New witnesses came forward, claiming to have seen suspicious activity in Central Park on the day of Caden's death. Anonymous sources hinted at inconsistencies in the autopsy report. The pressure began to take its toll on Paige's already fragile health. She found herself struggling to sleep, plagued by nightmares in which Caden accused her of his murder. Her appetite disappeared, and she lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. It was during this time that Paige received an unexpected call from Tiffany Carter. "Paige," Tiffany's voice was urgent, "I need to see you, in person. There's something you need to know." Despite her reservations, Paige agreed to meet Tiffany at a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side. As she entered the dimly lit space, she spotted Tiffany in a corner booth, looking nervous and drawn. "Thank you for coming," Tiffany said, as Paige slid into the seat across from her. I don't know where to begin." Paige's patience, worn thin by weeks of stress, snapped. "How about you start with why you really called me here? Are you behind these new allegations?" Tiffany's eyes widened in shock. "What? No, Paige, I called you because I think I know who is." For the next hour, Tiffany wove a tale that left Paige reeling. She spoke of secret meetings, of whispered conversations overheard in Winters Construction's corridors. She named names, board members who had been loyal to Caden, who stood to lose everything if the full extent of the company's misdeeds came to light. "They're trying to discredit you, Paige," Tiffany concluded. "If they can cast doubt on Caden's suicide, they can paint this whole thing as the elaborate plot orchestrated by you. They think they can save themselves by destroying you." Paige sat back, her mind whirling. "Why are you telling me this, Tiffany? Why now?" Tiffany's eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm tired of the lies. Because what they're doing to you is wrong. And because I owe you. For everything. As Paige left the cafe, her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Turn on CNN now." With a sense of dread, Paige ducked into a nearby bar, asking the bartender to switch to CNN. Her heart nearly stopped as she saw the breaking news banner. Winters construction board member claims evidence of conspiracy in CEO's death. The next few hours were a whirlwind of frantic calls and emergency meetings. Paige's team worked tirelessly to counter the new allegations, but it felt like trying to stem a flood with a teaspoon. As midnight approached, Paige found herself standing on the balcony of her old penthouse, looking out over the city she once thought she knew. The lights of New York glittered below, beautiful and indifferent to the turmoil in her life. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Michael. "P, I've got something. Meet me at the office. Urgent." 20 minutes later, Paige walked into the Phoenix Foundation's headquarters, surprised to find not just Michael, but also Samantha and Olivia waiting for her. "What's going on?" she asked, taking in their serious expressions. Michael stepped forward, a thick file in his hands. "We've been doing some digging of our own. And Paige, you're not going to believe what we found." Over the next 2 hours, Michael laid out a conspiracy so intricate, so ruthless, that it took Paige's breath away. The board members Tiffany had mentioned were just the tip of the iceberg. The rot went deeper, extending to high-level executives, corrupt officials, even organized crime. "They're not just trying to save the company, Paige," Michael explained. "They're protecting an entire network of illegal operations that Caden had become entangled in. Operations that make the safety violations look like jaywalking in comparison." Samantha picked up the thread. "We're talking about money laundering, bribery on a massive scale, even human trafficking through some of their international projects." Paige felt the room spin around her. This is impossible. How could Caden have been involved in something like this?" Olivia's voice was gentle. "Paige, honey, I don't think Caden knew the full extent of it. From what we've pieced together, he stumbled onto part of the operation and was trying to find a way out. That's why he was so erratic in those last few months." The implications hit Paige like a physical blow. Are you saying Caden didn't kill himself, that he was murdered?" The silence that followed was answer enough. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Paige stood up, her decision made. "We need to take this to the authorities, all of it." Samantha looked concerned. "Paige, are you sure? If we do this, there's no going back. These people are powerful, dangerous. They won't hesitate to come after you with everything they've got." Paige's voice was steel. "I'm sure. I started this to uncover the truth and protect innocent lives. I won't stop now, no matter the cost." The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings with federal agents, late-night strategy sessions, and constant, gnawing fear. Paige knew that every phone call could be monitored, every email intercepted. The weight of the knowledge she carried felt like a physical burden. Through it all, her health continued to deteriorate. Dr. Chen's warnings became more urgent, but Paige pushed on, driven by a determination that bordered on obsession. She had to see this through, had to make sure that justice was served, not just for Caden, but for all the lives that had been ruined by this vast, corrupt machine. As federal investigators built their case, piecing together the evidence Paige and her team had uncovered, the pressure from the other side intensified. Paige received anonymous threats, warning her to back off or face the consequences. The media attacks reached a fever pitch, with new and increasingly outlandish allegations surfacing daily. But Paige refused to be cowed. With each new challenge, she found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. She made public appearances, defending herself and the work of the Phoenix Foundation. She met with victims of Winters Construction's safety violations, promising them that justice would be served. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Paige was preparing for a board meeting of the Phoenix Foundation when her phone rang. It was one of the federal agents she'd been working with. "Mrs. Winters," the agent's voice was tense with excitement. "We're moving in. Today. We've got enough to make the arrests." Paige's heart raced. "All of them?" "All the major players," the agent confirmed. "But Mrs. Winters, you need to be careful. We can't be sure we've identified everyone involved. You should consider going somewhere safe until this is over." But Paige had no intention of hiding. This was the moment she had been fighting for, and she was determined to see it through. As news of the arrests broke, Paige watched from her office as the story unfolded on every major network. Prominent business leaders, politicians, and criminals were led away in handcuffs. The scope of the conspiracy, laid bare for the world to see, was staggering. Amidst the chaos, Paige received another call, this one from Tiffany. "Paige," Tiffany's voice was shaking, "they're coming for me. I don't know what to do." Despite everything, Paige felt a pang of sympathy. "Turn yourself in, Tiffany. Tell them everything you know, it's the only way." As she hung up, Paige was struck by the contrast between her life now and the luxurious existence she had once shared with Caden. She thought of the lavish parties, the expensive gifts, the carefree days by the pool of their Hamptons estate. How hollow it all seemed now in the face of the truth she had uncovered. But even as she reflected on this, Paige knew that her fight was far from over. The arrests were just the beginning. There would be trials, testimonies, a long and arduous process of bringing all those responsible to justice. And through it all, her own battle with cancer continued. As the adrenaline of the past few weeks began to fade, Paige felt the toll it had taken on her body. She was exhausted, in pain, and facing the very real possibility that she might not live to see the end of this story she had set in motion. It was this realization that led Paige to make a decision that would shock everyone around her. On the evening of the arrests, as the world was still reeling from the revelations, Paige called a press conference. Standing before a sea of cameras, looking frail but determined, Paige began to speak. "Good evening. As you all know, today marks a significant step towards justice in the Winters construction case. But there's something else you need to know." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I have terminal cancer. My doctors tell me I have at most a few months left. But I want you all to know that I will spend every day I have left fighting to see this through. The Phoenix Foundation will continue its work, with or without me. The truth will come out, all of it, no matter what happens to me." The room erupted in shocked murmurs and shouted questions. But Paige wasn't finished. "And there's one more thing. To those who are still out there who think they've escaped justice, know this: I've made arrangements. If anything happens to me, if there's even a hint of foul play, everything I know, every piece of evidence I've gathered, will be released to the press and to law enforcement. You cannot stop this. The truth will prevail." As Paige stepped away from the podium, supported by Olivia and Michael, she felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. She had laid all her cards on the table, had taken away the last weapon her enemies could use against her. But little did she know, her bold move was about to set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the most shocking revelation of all. One that would change everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, and the man she had loved and lost. As she was driven home from the press conference, exhausted but resolute, Paige's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained just 4 words, but they were enough to make her blood run cold. "Caden Winters is alive." The text message burned in Paige's mind like a brand. Caden Winters is alive. 4 simple words that shattered everything she thought she knew, everything she had fought for over the past months. Her hands shook as she stared at the screen, her mind reeling with possibilities and questions. "Stop the car," she managed to croak out to the driver. As the vehicle pulled to the curb, Paige stumbled out, gulping in the cool night air. Olivia, who had been sitting silently beside her, rushed to her side. "Paige, what's wrong? What happened?" Unable to speak, Paige simply held out her phone. Olivia's sharp intake of breath told her that her friend had seen the message. "Oh my God," Olivia whispered. Could this be real?" Paige shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't know, but we need to find out. Now." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic activity. Paige, despite her weakened state, threw herself into the investigation with a fervor that alarmed her friends and doctors alike. She called in every favor, used every resource at her disposal to trace the origin of the text message. Meanwhile, the fallout from her press conference continued to reverberate through the media and legal worlds. The revelation of her terminal diagnosis had turned public opinion decisively in her favor, painting her as a tragic hero fighting for justice in her final days. The announcement of her dead man's switch, the promise to release all her evidence if anything happened to her, had sent shockwaves through the remaining conspirators. But Paige was oblivious to all of this. Her entire focus was on uncovering the truth about Caden. Had he really faked his own death? And if so, why? What part had he played in the larger conspiracy? It was Michael who finally made the breakthrough. Using his contacts in the tech world, he managed to trace the text message to a burner phone purchased in a small town in upstate New York. Security camera footage from the store showed a man who, while altered in appearance, was unmistakably Caden Winters. When Michael showed her the footage, Paige felt her world tilt on its axis. "He's alive," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "All this time, he's been alive." The revelation set off a new frenzy of activity. Federal agents, already stretched thin by the ongoing investigation into the Winters construction conspiracy, now found themselves hunting for a man they had believed dead for months. Paige, however, had other plans. Against the vehement objections of her doctors and friends, she insisted on going to the town where Caden had been spotted. "I need to face him," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I need to hear the truth from him." The journey to upstate New York was grueling. Paige's body, weakened by cancer and months of stress, protested every mile. But she pushed on, driven by a need for answers that overshadowed everything else. They arrived in the small town of Millbrook as dawn was breaking. The streets were quiet, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Paige, bundled up against the chill, scanned every face they passed, her heart jumping at every tall, dark-haired man. It was mid-morning when they finally found him. Caden, or rather, the man Caden had become, was working in a small bookstore on the outskirts of town. He looked different, thinner, with graying hair and a beard, but there was no mistaking those eyes. The bell above the door jingled as Paige entered. Caden looked up, a friendly smile on his face that froze the moment he saw her. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the air heavy with unspoken words. Then Caden broke the silence, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Paige, you found me." What followed was a conversation that would haunt Paige for the rest of her days. Caden, his composure crumbling, poured out a tale of fear, desperation, and misguided attempts at protection. "I never wanted any of this," he said, his eyes pleading for understanding. "When I discovered how deep the corruption went, I knew I had to do something. But they threatened you, Paige. They said they'd kill you if I talked." Paige listened, her heart a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. "So you decided to die instead?" Caden nodded, shame etched on his face. I thought if I was gone, they'd leave you alone. I could work from the shadows, gather evidence, bring them down without putting you at risk." "And Tiffany?" Paige couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Was she part of your grand plan too?" Caden flinched. "Tiffany was a mistake. A stupid, selfish mistake. I was lonely, scared. But that's no excuse. I'm so sorry, Paige, for everything." As Caden continued to explain, detailing his months in hiding, his efforts to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy, Paige felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if she was watching a movie of someone else's life, someone else's pain. When Caden finally fell silent, Paige took a deep breath. "I'm dying, Caden. The cancer, it's spread. The doctors say I have maybe 2 months left." The color drained from Caden's face. "No," he whispered. "No, that can't be. Paige, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please let me make it right. We can fight this together. I'll turn myself in, testify, whatever it takes." Paige held up a hand, stopping him. "It's too late for that, Caden. What's done is done. But there is something you can do. You can help me finish this, help me make sure that everyone responsible faces justice." Over the next few weeks, as autumn deepened into winter, Caden worked tirelessly alongside Paige and her team. He provided crucial evidence, testified before grand juries, and helped federal prosecutors build an ironclad case against the conspirators. The trials, when they finally began, were a media sensation. Day after day, new revelations shocked the public. The scope of the corruption, the lives ruined, the depths to which powerful people had sunk, it was almost too much to comprehend. Through it all, Paige's health continued to decline. She attended the trials when she could, her gaunt face a stark reminder of the personal cost of her fight for justice. On days when she was too weak to leave her hospital bed, she watched the proceedings on TV, her hand clasped tightly in Olivia's. As the verdicts began to come in, guilty, 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 Paige felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The machine she had set in motion was working, grinding inexorably towards justice. But even as she celebrated these victories, Paige knew her own time was running out. In quiet moments between hospital visits and legal briefings, She worked on finalizing her will and the future of the Phoenix Foundation. It was during one of these sessions, as she sat with her lawyer going over the details, that Paige made a decision that would shock everyone. "I want to include Caden," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Not as a beneficiary, but as part of the Foundation's oversight board." Her lawyer looked startled. "Are you sure about this, Paige? After everything that's happened?" Paige nodded. "I'm sure. Caden made terrible mistakes, but in the end, he did the right thing. And he understands this world, the temptations and pitfalls. His experience could be valuable." As winter deepened, Paige's condition worsened. The trials were still ongoing, but she had done her part. Now surrounded by her closest friends and a repentant Caden, she prepared for her final battle. In her last days, Paige asked for a meeting with Tiffany. The younger woman, awaiting her own trial, was brought to the hospital under guard. When she saw Paige, frail and pale in her hospital bed, Tiffany broke down in tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, "for everything. You didn't deserve any of this." Paige reached out, taking Tiffany's hand. "I forgive you," she said simply. "We all made mistakes. What matters is what we do to make things right." As Tiffany left, visibly shaken by the encounter, Paige turned to Caden, who had been watching silently from the corner. "Promise me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you'll see this through, that you'll make sure the Foundation continues its work." Caden took her hand, tears in his eyes. "I promise, Paige. I won't let you down. Not again." On a cold January morning, with snow falling gently outside her hospital room window, Paige Randall Winters took her last breath. She was surrounded by those who loved her. Olivia, Michael, Dr. Chen, and yes, Caden. As she slipped away, a small smile played on her lips, as if she knew that her fight, her sacrifice, had not been in vain. The reading of Paige's will, held a week after her funeral, was a somber affair. The bulk of her estate, as expected, went to the Phoenix Foundation. But there were surprises too. She had left generous bequests to the families of those who had been hurt by Winters Construction's safety violations, and in a move that left many stunned, she had included a provision for Tiffany. Not money, but a chance at redemption through work with the Foundation's outreach programs. For Caden, the will contained both a burden and an opportunity. As Paige had decided, he was named to the Foundation's oversight board. But with this position came a clear mandate to use his knowledge and experience to prevent others from falling into the traps of greed and corruption that had nearly destroyed him. In the months and years that followed, the full impact of Paige's life and death continued to ripple outward. The trials concluded with most of the conspirators receiving lengthy prison sentences. Winters Construction, once a titan of industry, was dissolved, its assets used to compensate victims and fund safety initiatives. Caden, true to his promise, threw himself into the work of the Phoenix Foundation. He became a vocal advocate for corporate responsibility and ethical business practices, using his own story as a cautionary tale. It was a path of redemption, long and difficult, but one he walked with determination. Tiffany, upon her release from prison, took up Paige's offer. She began working with the Foundation's programs for at-risk youth, sharing her experiences and helping others avoid the pitfalls she had succumbed to. The Foundation itself grew beyond anything Paige could have imagined. Its dual mission, supporting cancer research and fighting corporate corruption, made it a powerful force for change. Lives were saved, both in hospitals and in communities threatened by unethical business practices. 5 years after Paige's death, on a crisp autumn day, much like the one when their story had begun, Caden stood before a gathered crowd. Behind him loomed the newly completed Paige Randall Winters Memorial Hospital, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to cancer research and treatment. As he prepared to cut the ribbon, Caden looked out at the sea of faces. He saw hope there, and determination, and the promise of a better future. In that moment, he felt Paige's presence as strongly as if she were standing beside him. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "this is Paige's true legacy. Not vengeance, not destruction, but hope. Hope for those battling cancer. Hope for those fighting against corruption. Hope for all of us to be better than we were yesterday." As the ribbon fell away and the crowd erupted in cheers, Caden felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew that he would carry the guilt of his past actions for the rest of his life, But he also knew that every day, in ways big and small, he was honoring Paige's memory and making amends for his mistakes. In the end, Paige's story was not just one of tragedy and revenge. It was a testament to the power of one person to effect change, to the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds, and to the enduring nature of love, not the fairy tale kind, but the complex, messy, real love that survives betrayal and finds forgiveness. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. And if one listened closely, they might have heard a whisper on the wind, the voice of a woman who had faced death without flinching, who had turned her pain into purpose, and who had, in the end, changed the world. "Well done," the wind seemed to say. "Well done indeed." If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.